Hello everyone. In this video, I do a comprehensive set of scientific tests on the Fitbit Luxe. First, I'll test the quality of the sleep tracking against a scientific EEG monitor. Second, I'll test the heart rate accuracy. And finally, I'll do a step counting test. As always, I do not want to waste your time, so timestamps are in the description below and also on the timeline. For those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Before getting to the test, I would like to provide the most important background information on the Fitbit Luxe in under 45 seconds. The Fitbit Luxe has 24-hour heart rate monitoring, it measures your heart rate variability and tracks your breathing rate while you're sleeping. The Fitbit Luxe is water resistant up to 50 meters. However, it does not have built-in GPS, so you'll need to bring your phone when you go running or cycling. The Fitbit Luxe estimates your sleep stages using a combination of your movements and your heart rate patterns. Fitbit says that when you haven't moved for about an hour, your tracker assumes that you've been asleep. After syncing your device in the morning, Fitbit uses your movement and heart rate patterns to estimate your sleep stages and sleep cycles from the previous night. However, my channel is not so much about listing features. Instead, on my channel, I try to test the accuracy of the different measurements. Over the last 2 weeks, I've done detailed tests on the Fitbit Luxe. In this video, I'll present those results, and I want to start off with this sleep test. For the sleep comparison, I wore the Fitbit Luxe to bed for 5 nights. At the same time, I also wore this portable scientific EEG device and I recorded myself using an infrared camera. The EEG device can actually measure your brainwaves and muscle movements. I manually went through the recording of the EEG and scored each part of the night for the different sleep stages. I also downloaded my data from the Fitbit servers and converted the data into a usable format. Now, to the results I obtained. Let's first have a look at the accuracy over the 5 individual nights, after which I will do a statistical overview analysis. Here we see the first night I recorded. On top you see the sleep stages as they were recorded using the EEG device. On the horizontal axis we have the time of night, and as you can see I went to bed a little bit after 1. On the vertical axis we have the different sleep stages, that being deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep and awake. The sleep stages are plotted in the same order that they're usually displayed in research. On the bottom you can see a similar plot, but now for the sleep stages as they were recorded using the Fitbit Luxe. If we first look at deep sleep according to the EEG, which are marked here in purple, we see a pretty good overlap between the Fitbit Luxe and the EEG device. The Fitbit Luxe basically detected all 3 deep sleep segments, though one was slightly shifted, and also the total duration of deep sleep was a bit off. However, overall this is still a pretty good result. Looking at REM sleep, which is marked here in red, we also see a pretty good accuracy. All 4 major REM sleep segments were detected, though the last one here is missing some of the REM sleep. And again, this is not a bad result. Now to see the sleep cycles, I added non-REM sleep in blue and again marked REM sleep in red. Each sleep cycle starts with a combination of deep sleep and light sleep together called non-REM and always end in REM. I would say that just based on the data from the Fitbit Luxe, I would be able to see most of the sleep cycles, which is pretty good. There are only a handful of devices I've tested so far that are able to do this besides Fitbits. Next, let's take a look at awake time, which are marked here in green. This was also detected quite well for this night. 3 out of the 4 awake moments were detected, which is decent. However, also 1 extra awake moment was detected in the middle of the night. Checking the time I fell asleep and the moment I woke up, marked here in yellow-green, we see that this is pretty much spot on. Now this is the second night I tested. First, looking at deep sleep, we can see that it detected this almost perfectly. All segments were detected and they also had roughly the correct duration. Also for this night, REM sleep detection was pretty good. All 4 REM sleep segments were detected and they were roughly of the correct duration, except for maybe this 4th segment right here. This also means that we can nicely see the different sleep cycles based on just the data from the Fitbit Luxe. Awake detection was not so good for this night. The Fitbit detected none of my real awakenings, but it did detect 2 extra awakenings that were not really there. Again, the moment I fell asleep and the moment I woke up were detected almost perfectly. For the last 3 nights, I very quickly want to review the different sleep stages to see if these confirm the findings we have so far. Now here we see the deep sleep for the third night, which is again very good, except for the Luxe detecting some extra deep sleep near the end of the night. The deep sleep for the fourth night is also pretty much entirely correct, as you can see here. And the same is true for this final night, except for some extra deep sleep near the end of the night. REM sleep for the third night was also pretty good, except for the Luxe missing a small segment of REM for the first sleep cycle. The same is true for this fourth night right here, where it misses some of the shorter REM segments. And we see something similar for the fifth night, where it misses a short REM segment, but it detects most of the other REM sleep. So overall, it seems that the Fitbit detects most REM sleep, except for missing some of the shorter segments. Next, looking at awake time for the third night, we see that most, though not all of the awake moments were detected, and also some extra awake moments were detected that were not really there. We see something similar for the fourth night right here, also showing some extra awake moments. In general, the Luxe appears to detect most awake moments, though definitely not all of them, and it also often detects some extra awake time that was not really there. Detecting the moment I fall asleep and wake up is generally pretty good. Only for this night right here, we see it detected me waking up a bit too early. However, finally for this last night here, it was spot on again. Overall, I'm pretty impressed with the sleep tracking of the Fitbit Luxe. As I mentioned in many of my other videos, I generally recommend Fitbits for sleep tracking. However, it's still great to see that this accuracy is consistently present even in some of the newer models. The Fitbit Luxe generally picked up on deep sleep very well. Additionally, it could detect REM sleep, and thereby we could also see the sleep cycles, though sometimes it would miss some of the shorter REM segments. Detecting awake time was one of the weaker points of the Fitbit Luxe. Though it detected some of my awake moments, it often also detected some extra awake time. To get an even more objective view of the results, let's calculate some statistics regarding the consistency between the sleep stages of the Fitbit Luxe and the EEG device. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, consider subscribing to my Instagram and my weekly newsletter. Of course, you would also make me really happy if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm hoping to get to 50,000 subscribers before my birthday at the end of July. Now enough self-promotion, let's see what the overview statistics say. First, let's look at the total percentage of each sleep stage the EEG device and the Fitbit Luxe predicted. Here I displayed those percentages for the EEG device on the left and the Fitbit Luxe on the right. Overall, these percentages agree pretty well. The Fitbit Luxe predicts roughly the correct amount of deep sleep and light sleep. Now the total amount of REM sleep is slightly underestimated. Also, it detects about double the awake time I actually had. However, of course, these percentages do not tell the full story. More important even than these total percentages is checking if the Fitbit Luxe predicts the correct sleep stages at the right time. And that's what I've displayed here. On top, we have the sleep stages according to the EEG device, and on the left, the sleep stages according to the Fitbit Luxe. Now, each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the actual sleep stages was recorded as each sleep stage by the Fitbit Luxe. First, looking at deep sleep, we see that over 80% of what was deep sleep was also predicted as being deep sleep by the Fitbit Luxe. Now this is really good. The deep sleep that was misclassified was mostly predicted as being light sleep. Next, looking at light sleep, we see this was also pretty good. 76% of what was light sleep was also detected as light sleep by the Fitbit Luxe. If it was confused, it was mostly confused with deep sleep and REM sleep, but also quite often with being awake. Looking at REM sleep, this is the least accurate sleep stage, though it's still not bad. Almost 60% of what was actually REM sleep was also predicted as being REM sleep by the Fitbit Luxe. We saw that the Luxe often missed some of the shorter REM segments and also missed the REM sleep near the end of the night, which is likely where the confusion comes from. However, as we saw for the individual nights, we can still see most of the sleep cycles based on just the data from the Fitbit Luxe. If REM sleep was confused, it was mostly confused with light sleep. Finally, awake time was detected correctly 66.7% of the time, which is not bad. If it was confused, it was mostly confused with light sleep. The next thing I want to check in more detail is how accurately the Fitbit Luxe can detect the moment I wake up and the moment I fall asleep. That's what I plotted here. On the vertical axis we have the dates of the nights I tested the Luxe, and on the horizontal axis is the time difference between the EEG device and the Fitbit Luxe for waking up in yellow and falling asleep in blue. So a positive number means it detected me as waking up or falling asleep later than in reality, and a negative number means it detected me waking up or falling asleep earlier. As you can see, the largest difference is 20 minutes for this single night here, where it detected me waking up too early. But in general, the difference is just a few minutes maximum, so this is really good. In general, there potentially seems to be a slight pattern where it predicts me falling asleep slightly too late, since most of the blue points are on the right side of the dotted line right here. In general, the Luxe appears to be pretty accurate though. So this is all looking really good for the Fitbit Luxe. It tracked most of my sleep stages correctly and was able to detect the sleep cycles I go through. But how does it compare to other Fitbits? Well, in the next section, I'll compare it to one of the cheapest Fitbit devices, the Fitbit Inspire 2, and the Fitbit's flagship smartwatch, the Fitbit Sense that I reviewed last week. I wore both the Fitbit Luxe and these two other devices at the same time for 13 nights. I exported the data for all of these and calculated what percentages of each of the nights they predicted the same sleep stages. That is what I displayed right here. On the vertical axis, we can see the two different Fitbit devices I compared the Luxe with. The percentage displayed is the percentage of the nights that the Fitbits gave the same predicted sleep stages. And the number between brackets is how many nights I wore both devices. As you can see, the Fitbit Luxe gave the same sleep state prediction as the Fitbit Inspire 2 88% of the time, whereas it agreed with the Fitbit Sense 80.7% of the time. This agreement is pretty good. The reason the Luxe and the Inspire 2 might be more similar is because I wore both of these on the same wrist, whereas the Fitbit Sense was worn on my other wrist. Just as a reference, here I added the agreement between the Fitbit Sense and a bunch of other Fitbit devices. As you can see, the agreement overall is roughly between 80 and 87%, which is pretty good. Based on slight variations in movement and heart rate detection, the algorithm has some variance, but as we can see, for the most part, the nights agree. You might remember when I tested the consistency between two Oura rings, the overall agreement between the two rings was just 67.6%, which is much lower than what we see for the Fitbits here, indicating that the Fitbit algorithm is likely more stable than that of the Oura Ring. Finally, I want to compare the consistency of the Fitbit Luxe to that of the Fitbit Inspire 2 and Fitbit Sense in more detail. Based on that analysis, I want to see which sleep stages are least stable in the Fitbit algorithm, which might be able to confirm some of the results we have from the sleep EEG test. Here I display a similar confusion matrix to before, but now directly comparing the Fitbit Inspire 2 on top and the Fitbit Luxe on the left. In green we can see that for most sleep stages, these two devices agree pretty well. Deep sleep, light sleep and REM sleep prediction all roughly agree between 87 and 90%. Only awake detection is a little bit less consistent, with 75% agreement between the two devices. We see mostly something similar if we make the same plot for the Fitbit Sense. As expected, the percentages are lower overall, but the deep sleep and light sleep still agree very well at about 85% consistency. REM sleep agreement is a bit lower at about 75%. And awake detection shows the least agreement at only 55%. I suspect that this has to do with wearing the two devices on different arms, which is probably the main reason for this disagreement. Awake detection likely heavily depends on motion, and I can imagine that there's a significant difference in motion detection between my right and left arm. However, this also means that the algorithm for awake detection is not optimal yet, if this is really dependent on the arm on which you wear the Fitbit. The same might be true to a lesser degree for REM sleep. Now, the lower consistency of REM sleep and awake time between the two devices also agrees with our findings we had in the EEG comparison. Overall though, I'm very happy with the performance of the Fitbit Luxe when it comes to sleep tracking. This does confirm for me that most Fitbit devices perform really well and that no one Fitbit device outperforms any of the others. So you can basically pick any device from their lineup and you'll get good sleep tracking. For the next set of tests, let's have a look at the heart rate accuracy of the Fitbit Luxe. To test the heart rate accuracy, I will compare it to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which is generally considered to be one of the most accurate consumer devices available for heart rate measurements. I wore both the Fitbit Luxe and the Polar H10 ECG chest strap for 7 spinning sessions, 1 road biking workout and 4 weightlifting workouts. That way I can check my heart rate at different heart rate ranges. Let's have a look at those results. Here I displayed an overview of the heart rate accuracy. Each dot here is a single heart rate measurement, with along the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Fitbit Luxe. The blue line indicates perfect agreement, so any measurement along this line had roughly the same value for the Polar H10 and the Fitbit Luxe. The red line indicates those measurements where the value according to the Fitbit Luxe is half that of the actual value according to the Polar H10. The reason I added this line is because in the past I've seen that many devices measure half the actual heart rate when they make a mistake. The more measurements there are in a certain area, the darker black the color. As you can see, overall there's a very good agreement between the Fitbit Luxe and the ECG chest strap, since most points are along the blue line. However, we do see some deviations in the middle heart rate ranges between the Fitbit Luxe and the Polar H10. And since the points are below the blue line, this means that the Fitbit Luxe detected a too low heart rate in these moments. Let's now have a look at the individual training sessions to see if we can find the underlying cause. Here you see the first spinning session. Along the horizontal axis we have the time, and my heart rate is along the vertical axis. In red I plotted my heart rate according to the Fitbit Luxe, and in blue is my heart rate according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap. As you can see, I took 6 short breaks in this spinning session where my heart rate would dip. For this first spinning session we see pretty good agreement. The red line almost perfectly overlaps the blue line. Interestingly, we do see some short spikes in my heart rate that were not really there, right here, here, and here. In these moments, my heart rate spikes quite suddenly according to the Fitbit Luxe, and I suspect that there might have been some sweat or something else that momentarily interfered with the heart rate accuracy, though of course this is not a big deal. That's also what we see for the next spinning session, where most of the time there's really good agreement, though sometimes there's a small deviation or spike in heart rate compared to the reference. We basically see the same for all spinning sessions, with good agreement most of the time. However, there are some small spikes in the heart rate detection by the Luxe, which you can also see for this spinning session right here, also for this one right here, and finally also for this one here. In general, I would say that we see similar patterns for my road biking session right here. Overall, there's pretty good agreement, though at times there are some spikes or smaller deviations, like for instance right here in the middle. Finally, let's look at some weightlifting sessions, which are actually the cause of the small problems we saw in the overview plot. Weightlifting causes sudden spikes in heart rate, and at the same time the muscles in my arms are tense. I suspect that this combination is what makes it difficult for most optical heart rate sensors to detect my heart rate. The Fitbit Luxe here is no exception. The heart rate measurements follow the general patterns in my heart rate, but it misses some of the spikes in heart rate that accompany each set I did. We can see the same for this weightlifting session right here, and the same is also true for the final weightlifting sessions, as you can see here, and finally also here. Overall, the Fitbit Luxe performs well when it comes to heart rate measurements. It has a few small artifacts when I'm doing cardio workouts, but these are just small issues. During weightlifting, it did have some more serious issues, so I wouldn't buy it for that purpose. However, please keep in mind that this is true for almost all wrist-worn wearables, and not just the Fitbit Luxe. The Fitbit Luxe also features a step counter. To see if this counts my steps accurately, I went out and took exactly 4,000 steps in segments of 1,000 steps. To get an accurate step count, I manually counted my steps using this tally counter. Let's take a look at those results. As I mentioned, for the step counting test, I went out and I took 4 times exactly 1,000 steps. I wore the Fitbit Luxe on my left arm and I alternated holding the tally counter in my left and right hand for each set of 1,000 steps, which is what the right and left labels refer to right here. Now these are the actual steps counted by the Fitbit Luxe when I was wearing it on my left arm, and as you can see they were pretty close to the actual 1,000 steps I took for each of the 4 segments. It was always within 16 steps of the actual 1,000 steps I took, which is good. Just to put that into perspective, here are the steps counted by the Fitbit Inspire 2 and the Fitbit Sense I wore at the same time. As you can see, the Fitbit Inspire 2 and Fitbit Luxe performed about the same. Interestingly, the Fitbit Sense appears to overcount slightly and always has a relatively high number of counted steps. However, it's important to note that I wore this one on my right arm, which might also have had some influence on the results. Overall, the step counting was very accurate. In a future video, I'll do an even more detailed step counting test. In that video, I also want to test if the Fitbit Luxe gives any false positive steps. With that I mean, does it count any steps when it's not supposed to count steps? For instance, when I'm typing or cycling. I also want to see how it performs on other people. Overall, the Fitbit Luxe performed very well. The sleep tracking was really good, as I've come to expect from Fitbit. I'm really happy with how it performed, and it was definitely at least as good as the other Fitbit wearables I've tested in the past. No other brand of devices has so far been able to outperform Fitbit when it comes to sleep tracking. The heart rate measurements were okay and definitely good enough for most people during cardio workouts. As we've seen for most wristband wearables, it did not pick up on all the peaks in heart rate during weightlifting. Finally, the step counting accuracy was also pretty good, with the Fitbit Luxe counting the correct number of steps while walking. So, should you buy the Fitbit Luxe? Well, in general, I'm pretty positive about it. With great sleep tracking and okay heart rate monitoring and step counting, the Fitbit Luxe is a well-rounded device. However, I do not think that the health metrics on the Luxe are more accurate than the cheaper Fitbit Inspire 2. Overall, when it comes to accuracy, the two seem very similar. However, the Luxe comes with a number of extra features and generally feels more premium and looks better because of the design and the color screen, at least in my opinion. So, if you're both considering the Fitbit Luxe and the Fitbit Inspire 2, you have to consider if you're willing to pay twice as much for the Fitbit Luxe as for the Fitbit Inspire 2. Also, if super accurate heart rate measurements and good SpO2 measurements are important to you, then I would recommend the Apple Watch over Fitbit. However, on the other hand, the sleep tracking of the Apple Watch is much more limited. Finally, I should mention some of the limitations of the data that I showed here. First of all, I just tested the Luxe on me and just for a limited number of days, and it will be interesting to see how it performs on others. Also, to do a full sleep comparison, it would be good to also test the watch against the full scientific polysomnography setup. In my videos, I do scientific tests on different devices like the Oura Ring, the Fitbit and the Scanwatch, and in the end I hope to use tracking to improve my life. So if you like that subject and like this video, consider subscribing to my channel and also consider giving it a thumbs up because it makes it easier for other people to find my videos. Thank you so much for watching and also consider checking out some of my other videos.